Hexham, a quiet little town where life moved at its own peaceful pace, was the kind of place where nothing truly terrible was supposed to happen. But in January 2023, that peace was shattered in the most horrifying way imaginable. A 15-year-old girl named Holly Newton, full of life and dreams for the future, crossed paths with someone who once claimed to love her. Someone who couldn't let go. Someone who turned obsession into murder. That someone was Logan MacPhail, a 17-year-old boy consumed by jealousy and rejection. Holly had ended their relationship, but Logan couldn't accept it. He followed her. He watched her. And on a cold winter evening, he confronted her in a secluded alley. What happened next was pure horror. This isn't just a story about love gone wrong. It's a story of manipulation, obsession, and a crime so cruel it shook an entire town to its core. Tonight, we'll uncover the chilling details of Logan MacPhail's deadly obsession and the terrible price Holly Newton paid. Holly Newton was the kind of girl who could light up any room she walked into. At just 15 years old, she had an infectious laugh, a kind heart, and big dreams for the future. Friends described her as the one you could always count on, the one who could make you smile even on your worst days. She had a close-knit family who adored her, a mother who called her the glue that held them all together, and younger siblings who idolized her. Her life was full of potential. Holly excelled at school, loved music, and spent her weekends hanging out with friends or doting on her siblings. She wasn't just loved, she was cherished. But as bright as Holly's future seemed, there was a shadow in her life that she couldn't shake. A boy she had once trusted, who would soon become her worst nightmare. Logan MacPhail wasn't someone you'd immediately suspect of harboring darkness. At 17, he was tall, quiet, and unassuming, the kind of teenager who could blend into the background without drawing much attention. But beneath the surface, Logan was a ticking time bomb. Those who knew him described him as intense, with a controlling streak that only got worse when he started dating Holly. He wasn't content to just be a part of her life. He wanted to be her whole world. At first, their relationship seemed like typical teenage love. Sweet text messages, late-night calls, and shy smiles exchanged in the school hallway. But it didn't take long for Logan's behavior to change. He started asking questions. Too many questions. Who are you with? Why didn't you reply faster? Why are you talking to him? His jealousy was like a slow poison seeping into their relationship and turning what should have been love into something darker. Holly began to pull away, realizing that Logan's love felt more like a cage. She ended things, hoping to regain the freedom she once had. But for Logan, the breakup wasn't the end. It was the beginning of his obsession. Logan didn't just miss Holly. He couldn't let go. He started following her on social media, obsessively watching her posts, analyzing her every move. Did she like someone else's photo? Was she smiling in a picture with another boy? These small, meaningless details became fuel for his jealousy, and it wasn't just online. Logan began showing up in places he knew Holly would be. Outside her school, near her favorite coffee shop. Always just close enough for her to notice, but never close enough to confront him. Holly, ever the optimist, tried to brush it off. She told friends it was weird and annoying, but deep down she was starting to feel uneasy. Logan's behavior was escalating, and she could sense that something wasn't right. She confided in her friends, but none of them could have imagined just how far Logan was willing to go. What made Logan's obsession even more chilling was how calculated it was. He wasn't acting out of impulse, he was planning. He began sending her texts, alternating between pleading and threatening. "We can still fix this," one message read. "You'll regret this," said another. It was a dangerous mix of desperation and anger, and it left Holly feeling trapped. She didn't want to live in fear, but how do you protect yourself from someone who refuses to let you go? By the time January 2023 rolled around, Holly was doing her best to move on. She spent her days focusing on school, her friends, and her family, trying to rebuild the life she had before Logan. But Logan wasn't done. In his mind, if he couldn't have Holly, no one could. And on a cold winter evening, he decided it was time to make her pay. What Logan did next was nothing short of horrifying. A crime so shocking that it would leave an entire town shaken to its core. This wasn't just a teenage heartbreak spiraling out of control. This was obsession turned deadly. And for Holly Newton, it would be the last night of her young life. On the evening of January 27, 2023, Holly Newton was heading into town to meet her friends. It was the kind of cold, crisp winter evening where the streets were quiet except for the hum of passing cars and the occasional chatter of pedestrians. Holly bundled up against the chill, walked with her usual lively stride, unaware that she was being followed. Logan MacPhail had been watching her. From a distance, he trailed her steps, his mind a storm of anger, jealousy, and despair. To Logan, this wasn't just another evening. This was the night he had been planning. The night he would confront Holly once and for all. In his pocket was a knife, cold and heavy, a weapon that would soon transform his obsession into an unthinkable act of violence. Holly had no idea Logan was there, lurking in the shadows. She turned down a quiet alleyway, a shortcut she'd taken countless times before. It was the kind of place that felt safe during the day but transformed into something eerie under the cover of darkness. And as Holly walked deeper into the alley, Logan made his move. He stepped out from behind her, his presence sudden and jarring. Holly turned, startled to see him standing there. "Logan?" she said, confusion and unease creeping into her voice. She hadn't spoken to him in weeks, and now here he was, blocking her path with an expression that sent chills down her spine. Logan's words came out fast, almost frantic. "We need to talk," he said, his tone somewhere between pleading and demanding. Holly tried to stay calm, but every instinct in her body was telling her to run. "There's nothing to talk about, Logan," she replied, her voice firm but shaky. "You need to leave me alone." But Logan didn't leave. Instead, his desperation turned to anger. "You think you can just walk away from me?" he spat, his voice rising. Holly took a step back, but Logan moved closer, closing the distance between them. And then, in a moment of pure rage, he pulled the knife from his pocket. What happened next was chaos. Holly screamed, the sound echoing off the alley walls as Logan lunged at her. He stabbed her once, then again and again, the force of his attack fueled by a blinding mix of jealousy and fury. Holly fought back, trying to escape, but Logan was relentless. By the time he stopped, Holly had been stabbed 36 times. The alley fell silent except for Holly's labored breaths. She collapsed to the ground, her body trembling, her blood pooling beneath her. Logan stood over her, the knife still in his hand, his chest heaving as he realized what he had done. For a brief moment, he seemed frozen, as if he couldn't believe the horror he had unleashed. But instead of helping her, instead of calling for help, Logan turned and walked away, leaving Holly to die alone in the cold, dark alley. Nearby residents heard Holly's screams and called emergency services. Paramedics arrived quickly, but it was too late. Holly's injuries were catastrophic, and she succumbed to them at the scene. The once vibrant 15-year-old was gone, her life stolen by someone she had once trusted. As news of Holly's murder spread, the town of Hexham was plunged into shock and grief. This wasn't the kind of place where things like this happened. Hexham was small, close-knit, the sort of town where everyone knew everyone. The idea that a teenage girl could be brutally murdered by her ex-boyfriend was almost too much to comprehend. Vigils were held in Holly's memory, with hundreds of people gathering to honor her life. Candles flickered in the cold night air, their flames a fragile but powerful symbol of hope and remembrance. Friends and family shared stories about Holly, painting a picture of a girl who was kind, compassionate, and full of potential. Holly was the kind of person who made you feel special just by being around her, one friend said, tears streaming down her face. She didn't deserve this. No one deserves this. But while the community mourned, the investigation into Holly's murder was moving quickly. Logan hadn't gone far. He was found near the scene of the crime, his clothes stained with the blood. When police approached him, he didn't resist. In fact, he seemed almost detached, as if he had already accepted his fate. During questioning, Logan's behavior was chilling. He showed little remorse, instead trying to justify his actions. "She broke me," he said coldly. She deserved it. Detectives were stunned by his lack of empathy, his inability to comprehend the gravity of what he had done. But his confession made their job clear. Logan MacPhail would be charged with the murder of Holly Newton. The evidence against Logan was overwhelming. The knife was recovered, still bearing Holly's blood. Witnesses had heard the commotion in the alley and identified Logan as the one who had been following her. And then there were his text messages, hundreds of them, filled with threats, accusations, and a toxic mix of love and hatred. "If I can't have you, no one can," one message read. It was a statement that now felt like a prophecy. As Logan sat in a holding cell, awaiting trial, Holly's family was left to pick up the pieces. Her mother, devastated and heartbroken, spoke to the media about the dangers of controlling relationships. "If you see the signs, don't ignore them," she said. "Jealousy isn't love. Obsession isn't love. If someone you know is in a relationship like this, please, please speak up before it's too late." For the Newton family, life would never be the same. Holly was gone, and nothing could bring her back, but they were determined to honor her memory by raising awareness about the warning signs of abusive relationships. It was the only way they could make sense of the senseless. And as the town of Hexham tried to heal, one question lingered in everyone's mind. How could something so horrifying happen here? The courtroom was packed when Logan MacPhail's trial began. The air was heavy with tension, a mixture of grief, anger, and morbid curiosity. Holly Newton's family sat in the front row, their faces etched with pain and determination. They had come to see justice served, to confront the boy who had stolen their beloved daughter and sister. Behind them were friends, neighbors, and members of the Hexham community, all struggling to reconcile the horror of Holly's murder with the quiet town they had always known. Logan was led into the courtroom in handcuffs, wearing an ill-fitting suit that did little to mask his youth. He looked pale, his expression blank as he avoided eye contact with anyone in the room. But for Holly's family, it was impossible to see him as just a boy. To them, he was a monster, a cold-blooded killer who had plotted and carried out the brutal murder of their daughter. The prosecution wasted no time painting Logan as a dangerous, obsessive individual. In their opening statement, the prosecutor described how Logan had stalked Holly, harassed her with threatening messages, and ultimately carried out a premeditated act of violence. This was not a crime of passion, the prosecutor declared, his voice ringing through the courtroom. This was calculated. This was deliberate. Logan MacPhail didn't just take Holly Newton's life. He planned to take it. The evidence against Logan was overwhelming. The knife he had used to kill Holly was presented in court, its blade still bearing traces of her blood. Forensic experts testified about the 36 stab wounds Holly had suffered, describing the sheer brutality of the attack. One of the wounds, they explained, had severed a major artery, making it impossible for her to survive. The medical examiner's testimony was graphic and heartbreaking, leaving many in the courtroom, including members of the jury, visibly shaken. Then came the text messages. The prosecution displayed them on a large screen for the jury to see, each one more chilling than the last. "You'll regret this," one message from Logan read. "I'll make sure of it." Another said, "If I can't have you, no one can." These messages, combined with the testimony of Holly's friends, painted a clear picture of Logan's escalating obsession and the danger he posed. The most damning evidence came from Logan himself. During his police interview, which was played in court, Logan admitted to killing Holly but tried to justify his actions. "She broke me," he said, his tone disturbingly calm. "She made me feel worthless. She deserved it." The lack of remorse in his voice sent chills through the courtroom, reinforcing the prosecution's argument that Logan was a manipulative, dangerous individual. But the defense tried to tell a different story. They portrayed Logan as a troubled teenager who had been overwhelmed by his emotions. They argued that he hadn't planned to kill Holly, that the attack had been a moment of blind rage fueled by heartbreak. "Logan MacPhail is not a monster," the defense attorney said. "He is a young man who made a terrible, tragic mistake." The defense called character witnesses who described Logan as a quiet, introverted boy who had struggled with low self-esteem and anxiety. They emphasized his youth, pleading with the jury to consider his age and emotional immaturity when deciding his fate. But their arguments couldn't erase the evidence or the brutal nature of the crime. Holly's family attended every day of the trial, their grief on full display as they listened to the details of her murder. Her mother, father, and siblings sat stoically through the harrowing testimony, refusing to look away even when it became almost unbearable. For them, this wasn't just about justice. It was about honoring Holly's memory. During the victim impact statements, Holly's parents addressed the court directly, their voices trembling with emotion. Her mother spoke first, clutching a photo of Holly as she described the devastating impact of her loss. "Holly was the heart of our family," she said, tears streaming down her face. "She was our sunshine, our everything. There isn't a moment that goes by when we don't miss her, when we don't feel the pain of her absence." Holly's father followed, his voice steady but full of quiet rage. "Logan didn't just take our daughter," he said. "He took her future, her laughter, her dreams, her chance to live a full and happy life. He stole all of it. And for what? Because he couldn't handle rejection, because he thought he had the right to control her. There is no justification for what he did. None." The Newton family's words were a powerful reminder of the human cost of Logan's actions. They weren't just seeking a conviction. They were fighting to ensure that Holly's voice was heard, that her life wasn't reduced to the circumstances of her death. When the time came for the jury to deliver their verdict, the courtroom fell silent. The tension was palpable as the foreman stood and read the decision. Guilty of murder. Logan MacPhail showed no emotion as the verdict was announced, his face remaining blank even as gasps and whispers filled the room. But for Holly's family, the verdict brought a sense of relief. Justice had been served, even if it could never truly heal the wounds left by Holly's death. At sentencing, the judge delivered a scathing rebuke of Logan's actions. "This was a brutal, senseless crime," he said. "You showed no remorse for what you did, no regard for the life you took. Holly Newton was a bright, promising young woman who had her entire future ahead of her, and you stole that from her. For that, you will face the full weight of the law." Logan was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 17 years before he would be eligible for parole. The sentence was met with mixed emotions. For Holly's family, it was a measure of justice, but it could never bring Holly back. For the community of Hexham, it was a stark reminder of how quickly darkness can infiltrate even the most peaceful places. The trial was over, but the pain of Holly's loss lingered. Her family continued to speak out about the dangers of controlling relationships, using their platform to raise awareness about the warning signs of abuse. They hoped that by sharing Holly's story, they could prevent other families from experiencing the same heartbreak. But for many, the question remained, how could a 17-year-old boy commit such a monstrous act? Was it pure jealousy, unchecked anger, or something deeper, darker? Logan MacPhail's actions left a trail of devastation in their wake, and the scars of his crime would remain with Holly's family and the town of Hexham forever. Holly Newton's story doesn't end with the trial, or even with the sentencing of Logan MacPhail. Her story is one that lingers, raising questions about relationships, obsession, and the warning signs we often overlook until it's too late. It's a story that forces us to ask, how does love turn into control? How does rejection lead to rage? And how do we prevent such tragedies from happening again? Holly's family has become vocal advocates for raising awareness about the dangers of abusive and controlling relationships, especially among teenagers. They've spoken out about the importance of recognizing red flags, constant monitoring, possessiveness, jealousy disguised as love, and taking action before these behaviors escalate. But it's not just about recognizing the signs. It's about knowing what to do when you see them. Would things have been different if Holly had felt safer coming forward about Logan's behavior? Could someone, anyone, have intervened in time to stop Logan from taking that fatal step? These are the kinds of questions that haunt not just Holly's family, but everyone who hears her story. And they're questions we need to confront if we want to create a world where no one else has to suffer as Holly did. For parents, Holly's story is a chilling reminder of how quickly things can spiral out of control. How do you protect your child from someone who seems harmless on the surface but harbors dangerous intentions? How do you teach them to recognize the difference between healthy love and toxic obsession? And perhaps most importantly, how do you foster an environment where they feel comfortable coming to you for help? And what about the role of friends and peers? Holly's friends noticed Logan's controlling behavior, but like so many teenagers, they didn't fully understand the danger it posed. Could they have done more to help her? Should we be teaching young people how to recognize abusive behaviors in their friends' relationships, not just their own? Logan's actions also raise uncomfortable questions about accountability. At just 17 years old, he was still technically a child. Should his age mitigate the consequences of his crime, or does the sheer brutality of what he did override any considerations of youth and immaturity? Was Logan born with this darkness inside him, or was it something that developed over time? Could intervention earlier in his life have prevented him from becoming a murderer? And then there's the broader issue of how society handles cases like this. Are we doing enough to educate young people about healthy relationships and the dangers of control and obsession? Should schools play a bigger role in teaching these lessons? Should social media platforms be more proactive in monitoring and addressing harassing or threatening behavior? These questions don't have easy answers, and that's what makes this story so important to discuss. Holly Newton's life was tragically cut short, but her legacy has the power to spark conversations that could save others. Conversations about how we define love, how we handle rejection, and how we address the warning signs of dangerous behavior before it's too late. Now we want to hear from you. What do you think could have been done to prevent this tragedy? Do you believe Logan's age should have played a bigger role in his sentencing, or do you think justice was served? How can we better educate young people about the dangers of controlling relationships and the importance of speaking up? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's make this a conversation that matters. Let's honor Holly Newton's memory by ensuring her story leads to real change. Together, we can turn her tragedy into a call for action. What will you do to help make a difference?